Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to photosynthesis. This diagram shows you what we call the light reactions. I realize this diagram is very busy. Let's look at it a piece at a time. Stay with me, and it will make a little bit more sense. The first thing you need to understand is that what we're looking at is taking place inside of the chloroplast. Remember, a plant cell has lots of chloroplasts. We're looking at the process called photosynthesis. We're looking at the photo part of photosynthesis. This is where light is going to come in. It's going to strike my chlorophyll. I'm going to harvest the energy from it to make ATP and this other molecule called NADPH. I'm going to use that energy in the Calvin cycle. We're not up to that part yet. Now what we're talking about is called the light reactions. So, in my thylakoid membrane, in those little stacks, those stacks are green. Why are they green? They're green because they're full of chlorophyll. They're green because they're full of chlorophyll. So here are my molecules of chlorophyll that are embedded, that make up part of that thylakoid membrane. A beam of light strikes my molecule of chlorophyll B, called P680. That beam of light will cause it to eject a high-energy electron. That high-energy electron is caught, and ultimately will pass that high-energy electron to another molecule, to another bunch of molecules, to another molecule, until that electron passes and hits chlorophyll A. Remember my kid with T-ball? So the first kid gets up and he strikes the ball. And it goes flying off and it gets caught. And it gets passed from one player to the next player to the next player to the next player until in another field, the field next door, a different game, this last outfielder throws the ball. And it lands on a tee that already had a ball on it. The first ball, which is originally from chlorophyll B, knocks a ball off of the tee of the second tee in a different game. And when it knocks that ball off, that ball goes flying and has to be caught by the outfielders in that game. That electron that originally came from chlorophyll B knocks an electron off of chlorophyll A, causing it to eject an electron, which gets caught and passed ultimately to this molecule that we call NADPH, and we'll look at that a little bit more in depth in a minute. All of this takes place on that thylakoid membrane. Now, we said, what do we need to do to the T? What do we have to do to chlorophyll B before the next kid comes up? I have to put a new ball on. And the way I put a new ball on is I take a molecule of water and I rip it apart. The oxygen will bubble away. I'll take the hydrogens, I'll rip their electrons off, and those are the electrons I use to replace the ones that keep getting knocked off of chlorophyll B. The hydrogen ions will build up out here in this stroma. They'll start to build up. What we're going to do is we're going to take those hydrogen ions, we're going to take the energy in those electrons, and we're going to jam those hydrogen ions in this very narrow space called the thylakoid membrane. If they build up in a narrow space, what do they want to do? They want to get out. And remember how we allowed them out last time? We gave them a special door called Atp Synthase to get out, and it's the revolving door thing, and they had to push on the revolving door really hard to generate the electricity, right, to power the building. The hydrogen ions have to push their way through ATP synthase, and when they do, that slams together the last phosphate back onto ADP. What that does is that remakes ATP. It puts the battery back on the charger. Okay. Do we have to replace the electrons from photosystem 1? What knocked this electron off? Actually, the electron from that one. What knocked the ball off of the tee in the second game in the other field? It was the ball from the first game. And I know it doesn't work that way, but just imagine that the ball takes the place. The first ball takes the place of the second ball. So I don't have to replace these electrons because what knocked this electron off was an electron. All right? I do have to replace those because what knocked that one off? A beam of light knocked this one off. This is photosystem 2. This revolves around, it begins with chlorophyll B. This is photosystem 1. It begins with chlorophyll A. Photosystem 1, we just said that. The electron that came from chlorophyll B will knock an electron to be knocked off of chlorophyll A. That electron gets caught just like the one in chlorophyll B got caught. It gets caught, it falls down, and ultimately dumps onto this high-energy molecule called NADPH. We're going to use the hydrogen ions. We're going to use those electrons to turn carbon dioxide into sugar. And that energy is going to come from, some of that energy is going to come from this molecule right here that we're making at the end of photosystem 1. So there are two energy products from the light reactions, and that's ATP and NADPH. And it's easy to remember. ATP is only made by photosystem 2. That's its only energy product. NADPH is only made by photosystem 1. It's its only energy product. So it's easy to remember. ATP are made in photosystem 2. NADPH is made in photosystem 1. Remember, NADPH, high energy transfer molecule. We said this. I've got to put the T back on. I got to put a new T, rather, excuse me, I have to put a new ball on the T of the first T of photosystem 2. I've got to put a new T, a new ball on the T. And the way I do that is by breaking apart water. I take the water, split it apart. I rip the electrons off of the hydrogens. I use that electron to replace the one that got knocked off. The oxygen will diffuse away. Those hydrogen ions, remember, hydrogen is a proton plus an electron. I've ripped the electron off, so I'm left with just the proton. This thing, the hydrogen ion. I rip the electrons off of hydrogen, turning it into an ion. They will accumulate inside the thylakoid. They build up, and they want to get out. They will want to get out. The way they force their way out is they force their way out of ATP synthase. Here we go. This is a different view of how this process called photosynthesis takes place. Here is my molecule of chlorophyll B. It's going to get struck by light. When my molecule of chlorophyll B gets struck by light, it ejects an electron. That electron gets caught and passed through some molecules that are going to take hydrogen ions out here in the stroma and shove them down here into the thylakoid membrane. This is my chloroplast. This is my thylakoid membrane right here. This little box is showing a corner of my thylakoid membrane right there. This box is that right there. So all of this, notice how that's a phospholipid bilayer? All of this is taking place right here on this little thylakoid membrane. How much thylakoid membrane is in there? And the answer is a lot. So how much photosynthesis is happening inside one chloroplast? A lot. How many chloroplasts are inside one cell? A lot. How many plant cells have chloroplasts? A lot. Knock my electron off of chlorophyll B. It gets caught. Hydrogen ions from the stroma get pumped into the thylakoid membrane. The thylakoid membrane is a very narrow space. So if it's a narrow space, it doesn't take a lot to make it feel crowded. So they want out. These hydrogen ions build up, and they shove their way out through a molecule called ATP synthase, which we've already talked about in Chapter 6. These hydrogen ions shove their way out, and when they shove their way out, we use the energy in them to force that last phosphate onto the ADP to make ATP. We put the battery back on the charger. That electron that got knocked off of chlorophyll B will ultimately get passed to chlorophyll A, which in turn knocks off an electron from chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A's electron will get passed and ultimately dumped onto NADP+, turning it into NADPH. And this is 1, 2 electrons because you're going to get 2 electrons to come off of one molecule of water. I've got to replace those electrons that keep getting knocked off of my chlorophyll B, and the way I do that is by ripping apart water. I rip water apart. I rip the electrons off of the hydrogens so that I have hydrogen ions in here that build up, that want out. The electrons are used to replace the ones that get knocked off of chlorophyll B. The hydrogen ions build up, and the oxygens bubble away. This is the light reactions. This is how plants harvest energy from light. This is how they make this stuff called ATP, which is the product of chlorophyll B, and how they make NADPH, which is the product of chlorophyll A. Those are the high energy products of the photo systems, 1 and 2.